This takes us now to the next hadith, hadith number 33, and this hadith is a tremendous hadith. It's the hadith of Abu Dharr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who said, أتيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وعليه ثوب أبيض وهو نائم ثم أتيته وقد استيقظ. He said, I came to the Prophet ﷺ whilst he was wearing a white thobe. He was wearing a white thobe whilst he was asleep. So then I came back to him and he had then awoken. And then he said, the Messenger of Allah, he said, ما من عبد قال لا إله إلا الله ثم مات على ذلك إلا دخل الجنة. There is no servant who says La ilaha illallah and then he dies upon that. He dies upon that, except that he will enter into paradise. Now listen to what Abu Dharr, what he said next. He said, وَإِن زَنَا وَإِن سَرَقْ. Abu Dharr said, what, even if he committed fornication, even if he committed illegal intercourse, even if he fornicated, and وَإِن سَرَقْ, and even if he stole, So the Messenger of Allah he said, وَإِن زَنَا وَإِن سَرَقْ, meaning even if he fornicated, even if he stole. Then Abu Dharr said it again, a second time. وَإِن زَنَا وَإِن سَرَقْ, even if he fornicated, even if he stole. And the Messenger of Allah said, وَإِن زَنَا. The Messenger of Allah said, وَإِن زَنَا وَإِن سَرَقْ, even if he fornicated, even if he stole. And then Abu Dharr said it a third time, وَإِن زَنَا وَإِن سَرَقْ. And the Messenger of Allah repeated again the third time, وَإِن زَنَا وَإِن سَرَقْ على رغم أنف أبي ذر. And so the third time he said, yes, even if he fornicated, even if he stole, despite the nose of Abu Dharr. Despite Abu Dharr, it's like an expression in Arabic, despite the nose of Abu Dharr. So then whenever Abu Dharr used to relate this hadith, when he then conveyed it to others after the Messenger of Allah passed away, when he would narrate this incident, he would add this statement at the end that the Messenger of Allah said to him. He would narrate the hadith, and at the end he would say, even despite the nose of Abu Dharr. And this is related by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. So there are many benefits to be taken from this hadith. First of them, of course, is the excellence of La ilaha illallah. It's a means of entering paradise, and that is clear and apparent. No servant who says La ilaha illallah and dies upon it will enter into paradise. Secondly, that we do not expel a Muslim on account of committing a major sin. On account of committing a major sin. And we should pause on this for a short while, because within this hadith, and in fact not just this hadith, but there are other hadiths as well that can be used. And this issue is very, very important, because it is from the doubts and the misconceptions which are spread by the Khawarij, these extremists and terrorists like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and people like that, and many people are upon these ideas, unfortunately. So one of the arguments that they use is they say that a Muslim who persists upon sin, who persists upon committing major sins, then he must be a disbeliever. And then the rationale and the argument that they bring is that a person can only be persisting upon sin if he considers them to be lawful. And so this conclusion is incorrect. You cannot infer from the fact that a Muslim persists in sin that he's doing so on the basis that he considers his action to be halal. Why? Because to make something halal which is haram is disbelief. But to commit the sin is not disbelief. Right? So for example, a man who drinks, right, his action of drinking is not disbelief. But for a man to say, I believe alcohol is halal, this now is rejection of the Quran. Why? Because in the Quran, Allah declared it to be haram. How can you come and say it's halal? Right? So these extremists, because they know that they cannot expel, they gamble, just because they drink, just because they fall into, shameful deeds, they know they can't expel them from Islam on account of this. Why? Because their aim is to revolt against the rulers and to try to take power. And so the first step that you need to justify that is to claim that the rulers are disbelievers. But you know that merely committing sin is not sufficient for you to expel them from Islam. So therefore they have these numerous doubts and misconceptions that they bring in order to justify their takfir, their expelling these rulers from Islam. So one of those doubts they bring is that they say, well, look at these rulers or these individuals. They are persisting upon sin. They are doing the sin every week. This clearly is evidence. That they've made it lawful, that they've made it halal. And this is completely false. In the time of the Messenger of Allah, there used to be a man who was a habitual drinker, and he used to be called Himar. There was a name for him, donkey. And this man, he would be brought to the Messenger of Allah, and the punishment for drinking intoxicants would be given to him. And on one occasion, one of the companions said, he invoked the curse of Allah upon this man. He said, may the curse of Allah be upon this man. Why? Because he's always being brought for drinking. And so the Messenger of Allah, he said, do not curse this man, for indeed he loves Allah and he loves his Messenger. So here from this incident, number of things. First of all, repetition of sin is not a proof. There are a proof that a person has considered something to be halal what was declared to be haram. This is something which is a matter of belief, and a belief has to be expressed. That's the only way you can know that someone has made halal what is haram. If he says, I believe it is halal, with his tongue. Other than that, you can never ever infer from a person's actions that he made that sin to be lawful. Right? So this is fallacious, this is false, what these people are claiming. But this is from the arguments they use. And they will say that, look at the rulers, they're always drinking, they're always gambling, they're squandering wealth, they're doing this, whatever. And all these arguments, let's say even if they were the most evil, the most sinful, the most tyrannical of people, whatever, that still is not evidence that they have left Islam. This is one of the doubts that they bring. And so while we're on this topic, we'll mention another one of those doubts. So one of the other doubts that they bring is that if you commit sin in an organized manner, in an organized way, that you have therefore declared it to be lawful. Right? So remember, they know that you can't expel a person from Islam just on account of sin by itself. So they bring, as I said, they bring these other issues into play. For example, a person persisting upon sin. Day and night he's committing sin. He must have considered it to be halal if he's doing it like this. This is false. Another mechanism is to say when a person does so in an organized manner. What do we mean by this? So let me give you an example. He sells alcohol. And imagine that he has a shop, a store. And then in this store, as you know, to run a business, to run a store, you have to have staff, you have to have regulations, you have to have like all the things that come with that, like, you know, employment regulations, and you pay them your salary, and there are rules of operation and things like that. So here now what we have tanzeem. This is now organization. Right. Does this mean that this person has become a disbeliever because he's engaging in sin in an organized manner? Of course not. This is not a proof at all. Even though we say that this man is greater in sin than the one who merely consumes alcohol, right? The one who facilitates this sin in an organized manner, he is worse than the one who actually commits a sin. So we say that clearly. We say that this person is a greater sinner in the sight of Allah Azza wa Jal. But does that make him a disbeliever? Does he leave Islam by way of this? Of course not. This is fallacious as well. And so this will be another argument that these Khawarij will use, and they'll say, for example, oh, look at the rulers, they allow the organization of, for example, music or singing or whatever else it might be, and then they say, look, they've made this halal. They've declared what Allah made to be haram to be halal, therefore they are disbelievers. All of this comes from ignorance, from jahl, from not understanding the religion, from not, taking this knowledge from the scholars. And this is exactly what happened with the first Khawarij, the first people who revolted against the companions, who revolted against Uthman, who revolted against Ali. They killed Uthman, radiyallahu anhuma. And they were ignorant people. They never took knowledge from the companions. And then they tried to understand the Quran by themselves, and they fell into extremism. And this is the same thing with these people today. These people, they never took knowledge from the scholars, and they make mistakes in these tremendous issues to do with iman and kufr, and when does a person leave Islam and enter into kufr, and things of that nature. So that's a second argument that they bring. A third argument that they bring, a third misconception, is to simply say that because the rulers allow it to take place in their land or in the nation, therefore they must have allowed it, they must have declared it to be halal. So let me explain what we mean here. Imagine there is a man in his house and he allows his daughter not to wear the hijab. Does that mean now that he has declared the removal of the hijab to be halal in the Sharia? Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. And you can't use that argument because, so for example, the argument is used, well, look at the rulers, they allow interest to take place. Right? They allow usurious banks to operate, or they allow concerts and they allow things of this nature to take place. Does that equate to making it halal in the Sharia? And the answer is no. Because then you extend this argument to every single household, to the man of every single household, because the man is the shepherd of his flock, the shepherd of his household. And so whatever sins a man allows to take place in his house, for example, whether it is, he allows his children to not pray, for example, or his daughters to not wear the hijab, for example, or they engage in whatever other things which are haram. Does that mean now that he has made all of these things to be halal and is therefore a disbeliever? The answer is no. Because there could be other considerations that this man is making. He could be thinking, well, perhaps if my daughter doesn't wear hijab, she won't really get very far in life. Or perhaps if my sons, don't, shave their beards and appear, whatever, they will not get a job. Right? He's not saying that it's halal to do these things. He's just following his desires, and he's just got worldly considerations, and for that reason he's allowing these things to take place in his household. In a similar manner, when you look at the level of a whole nation, of a whole country, There are many, and a ruler might have certain considerations, and we're not saying that these considerations are correct or we agree with them, but a ruler might think, for example, let's open up our land for tourism, we can make some money, and as part of this tourism, we'll allow some of the hotels to have alcohol or whatever else, for the people who are whatever. He's not saying that alcohol is halal. Or they might say, for example, that we cannot engage in international trade unless we, use certain banks, and to facilitate that trade, let's allow certain banks to operate, and it might be the case that those banks will be engaging in interest-based transactions, right? No one is saying that interest is halal, because again, this comes back to a matter of belief, right? A person has to say, I believe that interest is halal. This is why I'm allowing usurious banks. Just like a person has to say, I believe that removing the hijab is halal, or drinking alcohol is halal, hence I allow it to take place in my house, right? It has to be expressed verbally. So this is another third doubt that is brought, and all of these are from the shubuhat of the Khawarij, of the misguided people. They rouse people's sentiments, they rouse people's emotions, people who have no knowledge, people who have no understanding of the religion, people who do not value the scholars, and they rouse these people, and these people become they then round them up into a large mass, and then they direct them into harmful, subversive activities, whether that be demonstrations, revolutions, and all of this leads to tribulations, trials, and so on and so forth. And none of this is really rectification. So the one who commits a major sin, whether he persists in that major sin, whether he does it in an organized manner, like a thief, for example, you have organized theft, you have petty theft. A man is just walking down the street, sees something valuable in a car, and just grabs it. This is just petty theft. Then you have organized theft. You have these organized, robbers who plan, who watch, and they plan robberies on a grand scale. That does not make them to be disbelievers, just because they organized it and planned it, right? So these are shubhat which we should be aware of, and none of them are sufficient to expel a person from Islam. And any person who dies upon Iman, dies upon the Kalimah, then he will not remain eternally in the hellfire. Also, thirdly, we are not allowed to condemn any person from the people of the Qibla to hellfire for eternity. Why? Because everyone who dies upon Iman, he's under the will of Allah. He's under the will of Allah. In other words, we do not condemn, we cannot say with certainty that so-and-so person will enter hellfire. So for example, let's say there's an extremely sinful person that we all know of, right? He commits major sins or whatever. We cannot say, despite our knowledge of his sin, we cannot say that person will enter the hellfire. That's not allowed. We cannot make this, this claim and state, these kind of definitive claims. Why? Because even sinful people, they are under the will of Allah, right? If Allah wills, He will not punish that person at all for his sins. Perhaps there is something that this man did that we have not seen, and that thing which Allah knows of him, perhaps it will be his means of salvation. Allah will decide to forgive him, right? So we cannot condemn anyone to the hellfire from the people of Islam, even if we see them to be the most sinful of people, because on the Day of Judgment, if Allah wills, He will forgive some people out of His bounty, out of His fadl, and there are some people, He will punish them out of His hikmah and adl, out of His wisdom and His justice. And even if He was to punish them, they will not remain therein forever. Number 4, the condition of dying upon the state La ilaha illallah. So that means a condition is you cannot contradict this statement for you to receive salvation. right? So you can't violate it by falling into any of the nawaqid, those things that would invalidate your iman, like committing shirk or engaging in magic or other, the things which nullify a person's Islam. Allah Azza wa Jal, He said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا وَمَاتُوا وَهُمْ كُفَّارٌ أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةِ وَالنَّاسِ أَجْمَعِينَ. Indeed, those who disbelieve and they die whilst they are upon this disbelief, then they are the ones upon whom is Allah's curse and of His angels and all of mankind. Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah 2, verse 161. Also from the benefits, this hadith alludes to the issue of husnul khatima. To the issue of husnul khatima. Husnul khatima is the good end. When a believer dies and he dies in a good state, his final deeds, his final speech is upon upon goodness. This hadith alludes to that. Also from the benefits is the virtue or the recommendation of wearing a white thobe, of having a white garment. And in another hadith, the Messenger of Allah, he said, خير ثيابكم البياض فكفنوا فيها موتاكم وألبسوها أحياءكم. The best of your garments are those which are white, so shroud your dead in them and clothe your living in them. Reported by Ibn Majah, and Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala declared it to be sahih. And finally, the seventh point is the fact that a student returns back to his teacher in things which are difficult upon him. So in this hadith, what happened was that Abu Dharr radiyallahu anhu found it difficult to believe that sinful people of excessive sin, that they will enter paradise. So he repeated his misconception 3 times, and the Messenger of Allah told him 3 times. So in this, it indicates, from the benefits it gives to us, is that when a person is unclear, when a person is uncertain, when a person is unsure of something, then he mentions his misconception to the one who can clear it. And in this case, obviously, it is the Messenger of